You see these headlines flashing past constantly, these global flashpoints. They definitely grab your attention.
Oh, absolutely.
But often you're left feeling like you're just seeing tiny pieces, right? Snippets here and there.
Yeah, you get bombarded, but it doesn't really add up to a clear picture. It can actually feel more confusing sometimes.
That's exactly it. It's like information overload without the understanding.
Mm-hmm. It's a real challenge today. These huge world events get boiled down into sound bites, and you lose all the nuance, the context.
Well, today we want to try and bridge that gap. We're going to take a deep dive into one of the most, complex and critical escalations we've seen recently, the conflict between Iran and Israel.
Right.
Specifically looking at that really pivotal time from mid-2024 into early 2025.
A crucial period.
Our goal here, our mission if you like, is to try and weave those scattered news reports into something more coherent, something balanced. We want to explore the motivations, the actions, the consequences, really looking through the eyes of both sides.
And that's so important because this isn't, a traditional war, not armies lining up on a battlefield.
No.
For a long time, this has been more of a shadow conflict, fought with proxies, cyber attacks, intelligence ops, that sort of thing.
Right, under the radar often.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what made 2024, 2025 so significant and frankly so dangerous was that shift towards direct military exchanges.
Oh, yeah, that was different.
That was a big deal. A really rare and worrying step up. It just raised the stakes enormously for everyone involved.
Okay, so to really understand what happened in 2024, where that fuse was lit, maybe we should start with Israel's perspective. Their security concerns have always been central to how they see Iran.
Absolutely. You have to start there. From Israel's point of view, Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, plus militias in Syria, in Iraq. It's not just support. It's seen as building an existential ring of fire around them.
Encirclement.
Yes, exactly. They don't see these as independent actors, but as extensions of Iranian power, specifically aimed at threatening Israel.
And then there's the nuclear issue. That looms large.
Always. That's been a constant fear for decades. Israel looks at Iran's nuclear program, even with Iran insisting it's peaceful, and sees a potential path to a bomb. And for Israel, a nuclear Iran isn't just a strategic problem. It's seen as an existential threat, potentially aimed right at them. That shapes everything they do.
And the immediate trigger for a lot of the recent actions, we have to go back to October 2023, don't we? The Hamas attack.
We do. That attack from Gaza was devastating. A massive shock inside Israel. Over 1,200 civilians killed.
And Israel's view on Iran's role in that?
Unequivocal. They pointed the finger directly at Tehran, accusing them of funding, arming, basically enabling Hamas to carry out that assault.
So they saw it as Iran attacking them, just using Hamas as the weapon.
That was their assessment, yes. An act of aggression by proxy.
So in response to that, how did Israel act, particularly against what they saw as Iranian assets in the region?
Well, what we saw afterward was a pretty consistent pattern. Israeli airstrikes targeting Iranian positions, mainly in Syria.
Okay.
And also going after weapons convoys they believed were heading to proxies, moving through places like Iraq and Lebanon.
And their justification.
Always framed as preemptive self-defense. They argued they had to act against these ongoing threats that were being orchestrated by Iran through its network.
Which then build up to that really unprecedented moment in April 2024. Iran launching missiles and drones directly at Israel for the first time. What led up to that specific flashpoint?
Right. There was a huge escalation.
Yeah.
It came directly after an Israeli strike hit the Iranian consulate building in Damascus.
Yes, I remember that.
And that strike killed several very senior commanders from the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Which is central to Iran's power structure.
Absolutely central. So Iran declared this a massive violation of international law, an attack on their sovereign territory, essentially.
Yeah.
They vowed retaliation.
And they delivered.
They did, with a huge drone and missile barrage. Then Israel responded, hitting targets deep inside Iran.
What kind of targets?
Well, reports suggest they used pretty sophisticated weapons, maybe air-launched, to hit things like radar systems, missile sites, even some nuclear research facilities, apparently.
But selectively.
It seems so.
Well,
notably, avoiding major civilian areas, which perhaps shows both capability and maybe, just maybe, a degree of calculated restraint even then.
what's also interesting is, Israel has deep political divisions, especially over Gaza at that time. But on Iran, they seemed pretty united. What does that signal?
It signals that the threat from Iran cuts across those internal divides. It's seen as a fundamental national security issue that brings people together, at least on that front.
And they weren't alone.
No, they had strong backing from the U.S., from European allies too, and, crucially, intelligence help from some Gulf states.
Even though those states might normally be wary of Israel?
Yes, because many of them share Israel's deep unease about Iran's ambitions in the region. Shared threat perception.
Okay, so that's the view from Jerusalem. But now we absolutely have to flip the coin. Every action causes a reaction, and Iran sees this all very, very differently.
Completely differently. We have to step into their perspective now.
So let's talk about Tehran's view. That April 2024 strike on their consulate in Damascus, how did they see that?
For Iran, that wasn't just another strike. It was perceived as a flagrant violation of international law, an attack on sovereign Iranian territory because a consulate is considered sovereign soil.
Right.
Killing those senior IRGC figures there,
Right.
that was seen as a direct act of state-sponsored assassination, essentially, a major provocation.
Which, in their eyes, justified the missile and drone response.
Absolutely. They portrayed their massive retaliation as a legitimate, necessary, and sovereign response to an illegal Israeli attack.
And their support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, Israel calls them terrorist proxies. How does Iran frame it?
That's a fundamental difference. Iran doesn't use that language. They talk about providing moral and ideological support to what they call legitimate resistance movements, defending fellow Muslims, defending Palestinians under what they see as Israeli occupation.
So it's framed as anti-colonial, anti-Zionist.
Exactly. That's the narrative. It's part of a wider struggle against occupation and oppression, and that narrative finds a lot of support in parts of the Arab and Muslim world.
Okay, and the nuclear program? Israel sees it as an existential threat. Iran's response?
Iran consistently, publicly, maintains its program as purely peaceful. For energy, for medicine. They view Israeli actions against their scientists, their facilities, as illegal acts of aggression, unjustified sabotage.
And what about Israeli or Western actions in places like Syria or Lebanon?
Iran sees that as foreign interference, destabilizing interference aimed at undermining Iran's influence and threatening its own regional security doctrine. They feel they have legitimate interests in their neighborhood that are being challenged.
What about inside Iran? Was the population united behind the government's actions, like we saw in Israel, or was it more complicated?
Definitely more complicated. There was certainly support for hitting back at Israel, a sense of national pride, perhaps, but also a lot of anxiety. People worried about a bigger war, about more sanctions, the economic impact on their daily lives, which were already tough.
So a mixed picture.
Very mixed. But the government certainly used the situation to try and rally nationalist feelings. And also, significantly, to strengthen ties with countries like Russia and China and other sympathetic Muslim nations.
So when you put these two perspectives right next to each other, wow, it's not just disagreement, is it? It's like two completely different realities.
It really is stark. Take Hezbollah and Hamas. For Israel, they're terrorist proxies, period, threatening their security.
Right.
A phenon, legitimate resistance fighting occupation. The definition is totally opposed. How do you even start a conversation then?
And the April 2024 exchange.
Same thing. Completely inverted. Israel, defensive retaliation for the consulate bombing. Iran, sovereign retaliation for an illegal assassination. Same event, opposite justification.
The nuclear program. Israel sees an existential threat that needs stopping.
Iran sees a peaceful sovereign right and views Israel as the aggressor trying to deny them that right. Fear versus sovereignty.
The role of the U.S.? For Israel, a vital ally, a security guarantor?
For Iran, an imperialist power backing Israeli oppression, destabilizing the region. Completely different interpretations.
And finally, those actions in Syria or Iraq. Israel calls them preemptive strikes on hostile forces.
Iran calls them illegal aggression against its allies and its own legitimate regional influence.
These aren't just minor disagreements.
No, these opposing narratives are the conflict in many ways. They fuel the mistrust and make any kind of resolution incredibly difficult.
So, moving beyond the direct clash, what were the ripple effects? Regionally, globally, what were neighboring countries most worried about?
The biggest fear, obviously, was a full-blown regional war engulfing everyone. Countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, they're naturally wary of Iran, but they mostly tried to stay out of the direct line of fire.
But worried.
Deeply worried. And escalation could completely destabilize their own situation, their economies.
Speaking of economies, what about oil prices?
Sharp spike. Immediately. Not necessarily because oil fields were hit, but because of the fear of disruption.
Right.
Especially around the Strait of Hormuz, that vital choke point. Any conflict there sends shockwaves through the global energy market.
And the international community. Lots of frantic phone calls, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S., the EU, the UN, they were all pushing hard for de-escalation, trying to prevent a wider catastrophe.
But not everyone was on the same page diplomatically.
No, China and Russia tended to back Iran,
Yeah.
at least diplomatically,
Yeah.
offering political support reflecting their own geopolitical alignments.
And meanwhile, in the background, the cyber dimension was likely active.
Very much so, the hidden battlefield. Reports suggested both sides were engaged in cyber attacks targeting power grids, banks, government systems.
Hard to track, hard to prove sometimes.
Exactly. It's a constant low-level, or sometimes not so low-level, aspect of this conflict. And of course, public opinion globally became even more polarized. Pro-Israel sentiment often strong in the West, while pro-Iran, or certainly anti-Israel views, were widespread in many Muslim countries.
So let's look ahead then. Peace prospects. Well, they seem pretty remote, frankly.
He do seem distant, yes.
But here's the interesting thing, maybe the slightly hopeful thing. Despite those direct hits, Iran and Israel didn't go into an all-out conventional war.
That's a crucial point. They pulled back from the brink.
What does that tell us?
It suggests that maybe underneath all the hostile rhetoric, both sides understand just how catastrophic a full war would be for everyone. It implies that there are probably still some back channels open.
Quiet diplomacy.
Possibly. Some level of communication, however indirect, allowing for a degree of, well, calculated restraint.
And who's facilitating that? Are there intermediaries?
Yes, countries like Qatar, Oman, Turkey, even Switzerland, they've often played that quiet go-between role.
Keeping lines open when direct talks are impossible.
Exactly. Providing those essential, discrete channels for messages for potential de-escalation.
And the big powers, the US, the EU, what was their message during this period?
Message, particularly from the Biden administration and the EU, was consistently about calculated restraint.
Meaning
Urging both sides to think very carefully before escalating further. The primary goal was to avoid dragging NATO or the whole region into a massive conflict. That push for restraint from outside powers probably helped create some space, however small.
So wrapping this all up, it really boils down to the fact that both Iran and Israel genuinely believe they're acting defensively.
From their own perspectives, yes.
Yeah.
Defending their people, their security, their core interests.
And hopefully this deep dive has helped unpack some of the huge complexities behind those very different, very deeply held justifications.
Understanding both sides, even if you don't agree with them, is just vital if you want to grasp why this conflict is so intractable. It's not about picking a side, it's about seeing the depth of the challenge.
But, and this is the crucial point, to leave you with the risk of things spiraling out of control is always there. Escalation doesn't just threaten soldiers, it threatens civilians across the entire region.
Absolutely.
So any path towards stability, towards peace, it's going to require, well, mutual de-escalation first. It needs sustained international pressure. And maybe the hardest part, a willingness on both sides to somehow move beyond this cycle of revenge towards the incredibly difficult work of long-term diplomacy.
It's a monumental task.
It really is. A long road, no doubt, but one that affects all of us, really. Finding a way forward is in everyone's interest.